Yes, and part of me still misses it. I'm one of these people that in my life I would rather, for example, be working for my country than working for a business. In other words, if I was working in business, I would obviously have earned far more than I actually earn working for the government. It's notoriously badly paid.
Well, how much were you?
Well, at the time I left, gosh, I'm trying to think, it was probably, I don't know, 35, 40,000 pounds, which is, what in dollars, I don't know. I'm not sure what the exchange rate, but not much, nothing compared to what you would have earned in business at an equivalent level. But working in business never appealed to me, because ultimately I would have just been putting dollars in somebody else's pocket. I mean, ultimately what I would have been working towards would simply be increasing the profit margin. Working for the government, well, there's a certain pride in working for Queen and country, as we say in Britain. The idea that, I think people that don't know the Ministry of Defence, which is of course the UK equivalent of the American DOD,
Right.
People kind of think, oh, it's all guns and bombs, isn't it? Well, you know, yes, in extremis it is, but that's the last option, the last resort. What defence is really about is defence, and the Ministry of Defence has a saying that it tries to be a force for good in the world. So when you look at the range of activities that the MOD does, it encompasses, for example, anti-piracy operations off Somalia, counter-narcotics operations in the Caribbean, peacekeeping activities in Kosovo. So much of what the Ministry of Defence is about is not fighting people, it's trying to keep the peace and to try and stop the bad guys, whether it's through terrorism, drugs, piracy, or whatever. And people in the military and people in defence don't join up to shoot people and drop bombs on people. They join to do those sorts of things, peacekeeping.
Right. You mentioned UFOs. Was this a department that you chose to be in, or were you assigned to it?
Well, I had done another couple of jobs after the casework post that I was talking about and the women pilots issue. I did a job where effectively a lot of what I was doing was briefing. So, for example, when very senior military officers or politicians visited Air Force bases, my job would be to put together a briefing pack so that these very senior and busy people had effectively an executive summary of what the mission was at any particular establishment that they were visiting, a CV of the commanding officer, and of course the real thing, the big issues. In the Ministry of Defence, there's this saying that we foster the culture of no surprises. In other words, the Secretary of State for Defence should never be put in a position where he turns up at a military base and then the commanding officer says, of course the big issue here is that we don't have enough maintenance capacity. And if Secretary of State hasn't been briefed on that, well, he's completely, what can he say? So the issue is that as a briefer, your job is to find out what the problems are, find out what the questions that might be put are, and try and make sure that the Secretary of State, or whoever it is, knows what the issues are, so that the visit can be productive, and so that they can, it's not just a day out having fun, they can do real business and make some improvements. So I did that job. Part of the other job involved military aircraft accidents. I know this sounds like an odd mixture, I'm throwing together a lot of things, but sometimes that's the way it is. You get these jobs where you have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it's not necessarily logical, partly because it's been put together in a patchwork fashion over several decades. So, for example, I had that job where I was one day doing briefing, and next day I would be doing work that would follow the crash of a military aircraft, and that could be initially notifying the Secretary of State that we'd lost an aircraft, making sure that the next of kin had been informed, making sure that Parliament was told quickly and accurately what had happened, and then after the Board of Inquiry, then making sure that these very technical details were written up in a way where politicians, the families, the media and the public could understand what happened. So a lot of my job throughout my 21 years in the Ministry of Defence was about getting very complex information, sometimes written in very technical terms, sometimes written by the military who have a unique writing style, and taking that very quickly, assessing a lot of information and saying, right, what are the key points here? So the most important skills, I would say, across the range of jobs that I did in government were analytical skills and probably briefing skills, whether that's written or oral. People at the senior end are very, very busy people. If you have a meeting with a minister, you might have 10 minutes. You've got to quickly put the issue to the minister. Right, Minister, the issue that we're placing on the table today is the replacement of this aircraft. Our recommendation is, you've always got to make recommendations. That's another thing. You mustn't appear indecisive or weak. It's better to make a recommendation and then have it not adopted than say, well, we don't really know. So there's a lot of work. It's very difficult to explain the culture to people that aren't in it. It's an odd environment to work in. Sometimes it could be incredibly frustrating, but many times the rewards in terms of job satisfaction would be huge.
What kind of unusual recommendations did you have to make, if ever?
Well, in terms of unusual recommendations, I'm not sure that they would be unusual recommendations, but there would be contentious recommendations that you would have to make. Sometimes you would have to say, this is not going to be popular. This is going to be seized upon by the media.
Such as?
Well, again, going back to the point I was just talking about, if we're talking about an aircraft accident, you might have to say, look, actually, this was pilot error. And you might be in the very difficult position of saying something which would be hugely upsetting to the family, particularly if there'd been casualties, because not only would they be grieving, but you would then effectively be saying, well, it was his mistake that caused the crash. But the point is, you can't lie about this. People think that government lies. Actually, it doesn't. It spins, certainly. It's sometimes selective in what it says, but it doesn't stand up and tell lies. Well, not in the British government. I know a lot of people don't believe that. Yeah. A lot of people will be saying, oh, Nick, come on. Trust me, I was there for 21 years. If a politician is found to have intentionally misled Parliament, that politician will resign. If a civil servant is found to have told a direct lie,